Did you know that Saudi Arabia dishes out the world's harshest penalties to lawbreakers? A recent mass execution took the lives of 81 men, including 7 Yemenis and 1 Syrian. From flogging and whipping to chopping off hands in Saudi Arabia, all sorts of jaw-dropping and bizarre punishments have been given to people. Understanding regional laws and cultural backgrounds is essential while discussing this subject. In today's video, let's take a look into the legal landscape of Saudi Arabia. Here are the 15 worst punishments in Saudi Arabia. Number 15. Amputation. In Saudi Arabia, the punishment for stealing is severe and uncompromising. Amputation. Based on a rigorous interpretation of Sharia law, this old practice acts as a harsh deterrent to those inclined to steal from others. For the condemned, the repercussions are terrible and permanent. A limb amputated, a glaring reminder of their crime carved into their very skin. Under this regime, one may lose a hand simply by stealing a loaf of bread. Similarly, the one who is idiotic enough to repeat the act suffers a more painful punishment because the punishment is cross-amputation. This devastating process takes hands and feet and permanently disfigures the wrongdoer. This harsh punishment may seem to deter thieves and wicked people, merely giving short but stern answers. In November 2007, Saudi Arabia made news when it performed an unusual and severe penalty by amputating a thief's hand, signaling a strict devotion to Islamic law against the backdrop of the kingdom's growing public executions. Ammar Nasser, an Egyptian national, was sentenced to have his right hand surgically removed in Makkah after being convicted of pickpocketing within the sacred precincts of the Grand Mosque. The incident was reported by the official Saudi press agency and served as a striking demonstration of the kingdom's commitment to maintaining severe legal rules. This event garnered widespread attention from international human rights organizations. Despite rising criticism and requests for reform, signs of progress are emerging inside Saudi Arabia's criminal justice system. Number 14. Stoning. In some parts of the world, such as Saudi Arabia, the practice of stoning, previously known as rajam in Islamic law, is still used as a penalty for adultery. This terrible retribution comprises flinging stones at prisoners until they die. Stoning, which is based on deeply held convictions about morality and virtue, disproportionately affects women, who often endure the brunt of the consequences. Despite its occasional incidents and lack of recent reports, people around the world have strongly condemned the practice of stoning in Saudi Arabia. Human rights groups strongly oppose stoning, calling it an overly brutal and outdated form of punishment. Their concerns originate from the conviction that such techniques violate fundamental human rights, such as the right to life and the prohibition of torture and other types of cruel, inhumane, or humiliating treatment. According to reports, 4 stonings occurred between 1981 and 1992. In recent decades, however, no occurrences of stoning have been recorded in the kingdom. This absence could suggest a shift in enforcement techniques or reflect changing cultural attitudes towards such harsh sanctions. Nonetheless, the prospect of legal stoning serves as a sharp reminder of Saudi Arabia's stringent interpretation of Islamic law in questions of morality and justice. Number 13. Punishment for witchcraft and sorcery. In Saudi Arabia, the handling of people accused of witchcraft and sorcery is a matter of intense debate within both the legal system and the societal fabric. Despite their vagueness, the country's witchcraft and magic laws remain a powerful force capable of imposing severe penalties, such as death on individuals unfortunate enough to be charged. It is primarily a dangerous and unpredictable space for those who criticize such cults for prosecution. Such assertions often originate in the form of rumors, sometimes the consequence of somebody's jealousy and quarrels. Fortune-telling, the fabrication of charms, or the mere indication of casting black magic can all lead to the pursuit of procedures of conviction. In a community lost in rituals and superstitions, it is strikingly easy for a fictitious world, myth, and realities to coexist. In Saudi Arabia, being accused of witchcraft or sorcery carries serious repercussions, including the death penalty. Muri bin Ali bin Isa al-Asiri was executed in Saudi Arabia's southern Najran region on witchcraft and sorcery accusations, according to the Saudi press agency. His acquisition of books and talismans, combined with his admission of adultery with 2 women, contributed to his downfall. Mr. Asiri's execution adds to the documented examples, which include at least 2 other people sentenced to death for similar offenses the previous year. Despite the lack of detailed facts regarding Mr. Asiri's purported offenses beyond witchcraft and sorcery, Saudi Arabia's highest courts affirmed his sentence, resulting in his beheading. While sorcery is not officially categorized as a capital offense in the country, conservative religious leaders wield significant power, demanding harsh punishments for individuals suspected of indulging in such techniques, whether fortune tellers or faith healers. In a prominent case in 2010, a Lebanese television broadcaster known for a popular fortune-telling program was detained while on pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. Initially sentenced to death, international pressure, notably from his government and human rights organizations, resulted in his release by the Saudi Supreme Court, which determined that he had caused no harm to anyone. This case shows the intricate interplay between religious conservatism, legal interpretations, and international pressure inside Saudi Arabia's court system. Number 12. Penalties for homosexual acts. In Saudi Arabia, the penalties for homosexual conduct remain notably harsh, reflecting the country's deeply rooted religious and cultural beliefs. Saudi Arabian laws, based on strict adherence to Islamic principles and societal norms, specify a variety of punitive actions for those found guilty of homosexuality, including fines, imprisonment, corporal punishment, and even taking their lives. These punitive actions stem from interpretations of Sharia law that classify homosexuality as a severe violation of society's moral fiber. Within this perspective, same-sex partnerships are considered as contrary to established cultural norms and values, necessitating strict legal consequences. This deeply held religious system has historically influenced Saudi Arabia's legal response to sexual orientation issues, reflecting a broader cultural agreement on the perceived immorality of homosexual behavior. However, as Saudi Arabia goes through a period of revolutionary change fueled by cultural transformations and emerging global attitudes on human rights and equality, there is growing support for re-evaluating the country's stance on homosexuality. Increasingly, voices across the country argue for a future in which the rights and dignity of all people, regardless of sexual orientation, are recognized and respected. Given this shifting landscape, Saudi Arabia must seriously review the negative impact of its present homosexuality prohibitions on its citizens. However, on January 12, 2002, 3 Saudi men were killed after being convicted of homosexuality. The Saudi Ministry of Interior reported that their crimes included same-sex marriage and intimacy. This event highlights the draconian sanctions imposed in Saudi Arabia for queer activities, which reflect the government's stringent interpretation of Islamic law. These executions serve as a sharp reminder of the problems that queer people experience in countries. Number 11. Blasphemy. Blasphemy is a severe offense in Saudi Arabia, with ramifications that might shake one's very existence. To talk or publish anything that is considered an offense to Islamic principles is to invite the wrath of the state, with consequences ranging from lengthy prison sentences to lashings, and, in the most severe cases, death. Such rigorous procedures are reportedly in place to protect the sanctity and unity of the Islamic faith, which is vital to the nation's identity. However, as with any contentious issue, the practice of penalizing blasphemy has its detractors, both within Saudi Arabia and beyond its boundaries. Many contend that using legal means to suppress dissent and criticism impedes the free interchange of ideas and societal progress. They argue that by censoring competing ideas, Saudi Arabia risks stagnation and stifles the lively dialogue required for improvement and development. Furthermore, the broad and frequently ambiguous definition of blasphemy raises questions about the arbitrary use of the law. Individuals in an ambiguous society may be falsely accused and convicted of blasphemy, raising concerns about injustice and potential abuse of authority. On November 17, 2015, a Saudi court sentenced Ashraf Fayyad, a Palestinian, to death after convicting him of apostasy. The charges arose from alleged blasphemous remarks made during a discussion group and in his poetry book. Fayyad adamantly denied the claims, claiming that they stemmed from a personal vendetta with another person unjustly accusing him before the religious police. According to trial records reviewed by Human Rights Watch, Fayyad was apprehended by officers of Saudi Arabia's religious police at a cafe in Abha, in the country's south, in August 2013. Allegations arose after an individual alleged that Fayyad made disparaging remarks regarding God and the Saudi government. Furthermore, the accuser claimed that Fayyad distributed a book that promoted atheism and skepticism. The case highlights the perilous predicament that people endure in Saudi Arabia, where charges of blasphemy have profound implications. Number 10. Consequences of drug trafficking. The fight against drug trafficking continues in Saudi Arabia, with the government taking an unwavering position against this evil that afflicts countries around the world. Those found distributing drugs in the kingdom face harsh penalties, demonstrating the government's consistent commitment to combating drug-related crimes and protecting its inhabitants from the negative impacts of substance misuse. The harsh penalties imposed on drug traffickers highlight the kingdom's severe response to this issue. The severity of these punishments, which range from lengthy prison sentences to the death penalty, underscores the seriousness of the harm that drug trafficking poses to Saudi society. The government believes that no leniency can be tolerated when the safety and well-being of its population is at issue. This robust position against drug trafficking is part of a more significant effort to maintain social order and protect the public from the negative repercussions of drug misuse. Beyond the immediate threat of criminal activity, drug trafficking feeds a vicious cycle of violence and instability, corroding society's fabric and weakening the rule of law. By facing this threat head-on, Saudi Arabia hopes to safeguard the integrity and coherence of its social fabric, resulting in a safer and more secure future for everybody. To effectively combat narcotics smuggling and trade, the Saudi government has a diversified approach that includes strict law enforcement. For example, Mohammed bin Saud al-Ruwaili was found guilty of transporting prohibited substances and punished on a Saturday. His sentencing was tazir, which indicates a judgment by a court, rather than a punishment dictated by religious teachings, such as had or qisas. This decision was sustained by both the kingdom's Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, demonstrating the gravity with which such offenses are treated. In another incident reported by the Saudi press agency, several Pakistani residents and a Saudi citizen were arrested in Jeddah for possessing kilograms of illegal substances. The suspects were detained, and their cases were referred to the public prosecutor for further action. Notably, Levantine nations such as Jordan and Iraq have experienced an increase in illicit drug trafficking in recent years. War-torn Syria serves as a significant production hub, with drugs being smuggled through neighboring countries before reaching affluent Gulf consumers. This cross-border trafficking creates enormous hurdles for law enforcement in combating drug-related crimes and protecting communities from the negative consequences of narcotics. Number 9. Public executions. In Saudi Arabia, the prospect of public executions looms large, casting a dark shadow over the criminal justice landscape. Public executions, which are steeped in tradition and a steadfast dedication to upholding law and order, are one of the most visceral and terrifying representations of the kingdom's punishment policy. Consider the scene. A large crowd gathers in a well-known public location, with anticipation and tension apparent in the air. The condemned, chained and blinded, stand as silent witnesses to their imminent doom, with their final moments played out in front of a captive audience. It's a disturbing scene, a sharp reminder of the repercussions for those breaking the kingdom's laws. The rationale behind public executions is as simple as it is chilling: to dissuade others from following in the footsteps of the condemned, and to serve as a dismal warning against horrific crimes. To give an example of how concerning this is, Saudi Arabia carried out 170 executions in 2023. Human rights advocates frequently criticize the Gulf state's high rate of capital punishment. The executions took place in several cities, including Tabuk, Riyadh, and Jazan. Among those executed this year were 33 people charged with terrorism and 2 soldiers convicted of treason. December saw the most significant number of executions, making it the worst month. Number 8. Lashes and flogging. The snap of the whip has long served as a terrifying reminder of Saudi Arabia's draconian judicial system. Handled with accuracy and severity, lashes have been used to punish various sins, from moral infractions to criminal activities. This cruel practice, based on a rigid interpretation of Sharia law, has strong historical roots in the kingdom's legal framework that goes back centuries. For years, these lashings have been carried out in public, creating a terrible spectacle that instills dread in the minds of potential wrongdoers. The intention is clear: to discourage others from following in the footsteps of the punished, lest they suffer a similar fate at the hands of the law. While this public exhibition of punishment may have fulfilled its objective, it has also elicited strong criticism from human rights organizations around the world, which describe it as brutal and barbaric. These lashings have a significant physical and psychological impact, leaving permanent scars on both the body and the mind. Saudi blogger Raif Badawi was subjected to a horrible encounter in the port city of Jeddah, in a vivid example of state-sanctioned retribution. Following Friday prayers, he was led to a public square, where hundreds of spectators witnessed his whipping. Badawi was shackled at the feet and hands and subjected to 50 lashes, his calm quiet in stark contrast to the violence of the event. Badawi was sentenced to 10 years in prison and 1,000 lashes after being found guilty of insulting Islam. His crime? He criticized Saudi Arabia's influential clerics on his now-defunct liberal blog. The substantial fine of 1 million rials exacerbated his problems. His spectacle exemplifies the Saudi government's unwavering attitude toward dissent, especially when it violates Islamic orthodoxy. Badawi's case provides a stark reminder of the dangers that individuals who dare to express opposing views face in the kingdom, where free expression is severely restricted. Despite international criticism and requests for his release, Badawi's plight exemplifies Saudi Arabia's continued struggle for human rights and freedom of expression. Number 7. Atheism. Saudi Arabia, a country steeped in Islamic heritage, serves as both a bulwark of religion and a fortification against those who dare to question its religious standards. In the shadows of rising minarets and busy markets, a terrible reality exists. Atheism is not just frowned upon, but also criminal. In a country where the call to prayer rings out 5 times a day, and the Quran is treasured as the ultimate guide to life, the mere thought of disbelieving sends shivers down one's spine. To openly declare oneself an atheist, or to dare challenge the fundamental precepts of Islam, invites not just social exclusion, but also the full force of the law. Those who dare to criticize the prevailing religious dogma face harsh sanctions, including jail time, huge fines, and, in the most extreme cases, the prospect of the death penalty. But why do such stringent regulations exist in a country that wants to project an image of development and modernity to the world? The solution resides in the complex fabric of politics, religion, and the never-ending pursuit of national security. According to Saudi authorities, atheism is more than simply a personal belief. It is a challenge to the basic fabric of society. In an area plagued by the threat of terrorism and internal warfare, any deviation from the prescribed path of faith is viewed as a potentially destabilizing force, a break in the wall of cultural unity that must be quickly repaired. Number 6. Apostasy. In the sphere of religious commitment in Saudi Arabia, there exists a gloomy specter known as apostasy, a word that instills horror in the minds of both believers and non-believers. In a land where the muezzin's call reverberates through the air and the Quran is held aloft as the ultimate authority, abandoning one's faith is not only frowned upon, it can also cost someone their life. In Saudi Arabia, where the interpretation of Islamic law rules the legal landscape, apostasy is considered the greatest betrayal of religious devotion and is a severe crime. According to the rigorous ideologies governing this very traditional society, abandoning one's religious beliefs means severing ties with the essence of community cohesion. Many people believe that apostasy is more than just a personal choice. It threatens the entire fabric of societal harmony and religious consistency that sustains the Saudi way of life. The punishment for apostasy is swift and unforgiving. Death, frequently imposed with the icy efficiency that defines the kingdom's legal system. Once labeled as an apostate, there is no turning back. The dice have been cast, and the repercussions are irreversible. Some regard this harsh approach to apostasy as a vital means of protecting Saudi society's religious purity and stability, a barrier against the infiltration of dissent and ideological differences. Now, it's time for today's subscriber pick. One of the most heinous punishments handed down in modern history by Saudi Arabia sparked immense outrage in the entire world back in 2013. A ruling reportedly issued by a court in Saudi Arabia sentenced a man to paralysis as retribution for a crime he allegedly committed 10 years ago. Amnesty International called it an outrageous punishment that should not be carried out in any circumstances. 24-year-old Ali al-Kawahir was reportedly sentenced to qisas, retribution, in the town of Al-Asa, and could be paralyzed from the waist down unless he paid 1 million Saudi riyals in compensation to the victim. Ali al-Kawahir had allegedly stabbed his friend in the back, rendering him paralyzed from the waist down in or around 2003. Ali al-Kawahir was 14 years old at the time. Ann Harrison, Middle East and North Africa Deputy Director at Amnesty International at the time, spoke against this horrible decision, saying, "Paralyzing someone as punishment for a crime would be torture. That such a punishment might be implemented is utterly shocking, even in a context where flogging is frequently imposed as a punishment for some offenses, as happens in Saudi Arabia." A similar sentence of paralysis was imposed in 2010 also, but there are no reliable reports of it being carried out. Do you think that paralyzing someone as punishment is going a bit too far? Let us know in the comments below. Number 5. Gender discrimination. Gender discrimination has long been a sensitive problem in Saudi Arabia, particularly in the criminal justice system, where women are frequently subjected to disproportionate and unjust sentences. These discriminatory practices, which are based on patriarchal norms and fundamentalist interpretations of Islamic law, have received more scrutiny both domestically and internationally. One of the most apparent manifestations of gender discrimination in Saudi Arabia's legal system is the differential in sentences for men and women for the same crimes. Women are frequently subjected to heavier sentences, demonstrating the skewed nature of the court system. This attitude is accentuated by the male guardianship system, which, while less stringent in recent years, has historically placed women under the legal authority of male relatives, exposing them to punishment for activities judged disobedient or independent. Gender discrimination in Saudi Arabia is firmly ingrained in its legal system, societal norms, and cultural traditions, reflecting a patriarchal structure that severely limits women's rights and freedoms. Another example is the strict clothing code imposed by the religious police, or mutaween, which requires women to wear an abaya and a hijab in public. Violating dress code restrictions may result in harassment, penalties, or even jail. Furthermore, women in Saudi Arabia suffer severe barriers to education and work possibilities. Although considerable progress has been made in recent years, such as permitting women to drive and granting them limited rights to work in specific industries, gender segregation and unequal treatment remain prevalent in many facets of society. Overall, gender discrimination in Saudi Arabia sustains a system of inequality and marginalization, denying women autonomy, agency, and fundamental human rights. Number 4. Unlawful detention. The subject of illegal detention and torture has put a pall over Saudi Arabia, with countless reports outlining the systemic abuses that have happened. Despite the government's promises to follow rules that prevent such actions, the facts tell a different tale. Individuals have been detained without due legal process or tortured while in detention, and this has been thoroughly documented. These measures, which are frequently carried out to extract confessions or as punishment, not only violate international laws, but also engender fear and quiet in the population. One of the most concerning parts of this situation is the impunity with which these acts occur. Many detainees are imprisoned illegally, denied access to their family and legal representation, and left in limbo with no way to seek justice. Human rights organizations have repeatedly condemned these methods, citing instances of physical and psychological abuse such as beatings, lashings, threats, and enforced disappearances. These activities violate fundamental human rights and undermine the government's and its population's trust. Number 3. Punishment for political activism. In Saudi Arabia, an oppressive climate of conformity rules and even the slightest act of dissent or political activism can have serious consequences. This context defines acceptable speech and conduct boundaries, leaving little room for opposing viewpoints or calls for change. The criminalization of dissent and political action has placed doubt on the possibility of creating a society that values variety and accepts all perspectives. In Saudi Arabia, challenging government policies or pushing for reforms is dangerous to the established order. Those who dare to speak out against the established quo, whether human rights campaigners, women's rights advocates, or civil liberties supporters, face significant personal risk. Those who defy the established dogma face arrest, jail, and other types of punishment. The government's monopoly on free speech and expression is maintained by stringent laws and regulations that effectively silence dissenting voices and stifle open discourse. Number 2. Extrajudicial executions. Extrajudicial executions are the biggest problem in Saudi Arabia, which is overshadowing the country's human rights situation in the whole country. The monarch's disregard for opposition is demonstrated even beyond his realm, as shown by the fact that he would work through trade restrictions in faraway countries and harm those he sees as being against him. The account of Jamal Khashoggi may very well be regarded as a complex link between the issue of extrajudicial execution in Saudi Arabia. His gruesome demise at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018 horrified the world and highlighted the dangers that journalists and dissidents who criticize the Saudi government confront. Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist, was known for his sharp criticism of the Saudi government and its policies. He had lived in self-imposed exile in the United States since he was 17, out of fear of retaliation for his opinions. Despite this, he continued to publish and speak out against the Saudi system, particularly regarding human rights violations and a lack of political freedoms. On October 2, 2018, Khashoggi went to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to seek documents for his planned marriage. He never emerged. Turkish officials later confirmed that he was assassinated inside the embassy by a group of Saudi agents. According to accounts, Khashoggi was assassinated and dismembered, and his body is thought to have been disposed of. The demise of Jamal Khashoggi prompted widespread outrage and condemnation. Several world dignitaries and human rights institutes have pleaded for a wide-ranging investigation into his demise, together with the address of accountability to those who committed this crime. Saudi authorities beforehand refuted the existence of Khashoggi, but the result was that his life was taken in the embassy. Nevertheless, they irrefutably defined it as an unofficial operation carried out by staff members who worked without authorization. Even though the Saudi government tries to deny its involvement, it is believed to be either a deliberate and planned act or the result of the failure to separate from the authorities of the state. Number 1. Treason. In Saudi Arabia's legal system, the government resorts to strict laws aimed at the destruction of anti-government activities that are considered a betrayal by the state. Consequently, such rigid legislation reflects the government's firm position towards unauthorized activities. The term treason is very prevalent in the same context and has to deal with subjects that are liable to national security, manipulate state secrets, or damage the integrity and stability of the country. Those who faced the treason charges also illustrated those throughout this country do not take the issues of sovereignty, dominance, and national priorities lightly. Treason is a broad notion that includes acts such as spying, disclosing state secrets, cooperating with foreign entities to damage national interests, and engaging in activities that endanger the nation's stability. These acts strike at the heart of Saudi Arabia's efforts to maintain its security and dignity on the international scene. Those accused of treason face legal proceedings in which the gravity of their claimed offenses is thoroughly investigated before a conviction is reached. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.